How's it going, everyone? And welcome back to the Fantasy Assessment. Got a little siren going in the background. Yeah, that's how excited we are for Season 2, Episode 9. And this is, of course, the Scott Fishbowl special. I'm here today, of course. One of my co-hosts, Jerry, is again downgraded from questionable to doubtful to out. But Chu is here with me to hold it down. Chu, how are you doing, my man?
Doing well. Hopefully we'll have Jerry back for the playoffs. I know they instituted a new IR spot for that, so we'll definitely put him on that list there. But yeah, glad to be here. And I mean, right around the corner, we got Scott Fishbowl happening with the live drafts and the slow drafts. I know you and I are doing the slow drafts, but for all those people out there getting ready for the live drafts, best of luck and definitely tap into this and a lot of content like it just to get ready to understand the scoring and what you need to do.
Exactly. Couldn't have put it better if I tried myself. But that is what we have in store for you today. In-depth discussion into the scoring. I know, at least myself, kind of eye-opening to look at some of these rules and figure out how we wrap our brains around the changes. But that's what we'll be doing for you all here today. Live drafts are starting this Saturday, June 29th. Slow drafts then will start on July 8th. 22 rounds with third round reversal. So yeah, good luck to everyone. Chu, which division are you in and which draft spot have you taken?
So this was tough. I know in the last 2 years, especially like with the different themes, I'd feel more torn of like which ones I want to do. But so I went with Milton. So of course the Office Space character. I was very excited to see what kind of merch they can come out with that. So I think that some might still be incoming. And I have the 104 spot. So I didn't want to be too late in there. And I think I was still trying to suss out what my draft strategy was going to be. So I feel like 104. I'm not too soon to where I'm kind of pigeonholed there in a third round reversal. Not too late with the 104. So what about you?
Yeah, 104. I like that spot. We'll get into the QB scoring especially, but geared to that, I signed up for a division and draft spot very early on, probably as soon as I got the invite, and I went with, at that time, it was the Pirates of the Caribbean division. Since then, they have expanded the division, so mine got changed into Captain Barbosa. I will be repping the villain from the first movie, if I have that right.
Yep.
And I will be drafting from the 11th spot. Again, I chose that even before the scoring had come out. And thinking back to last year, I was like, okay, let me maybe get QB8 and QB10 on my team in the first 2 rounds and double down for my first skill player. All my plans were thrown out the window with the scoring. But before we get too far into Scott Fishbowl, let us go to our segment of Choose Your Fighter for the week.
Fight!
This week's Choose Your Fighter, I mean, something that may come into play in your Scott Fishbowl drafts is, who is your favorite late round sleeper at the moment? We're sitting here on June 27th, 2024. Who's your favorite late round sleeper that you just can't seem to get enough of?
So I've got two I'm kind of in between. So one, of course, with my loyalty to my Panthers behind me, Chuba Hubbard. I know he's not going too late, but I think there's still kind of that rookie allure of Jonathan Brooks getting drafted. But I do think Chuba Hubbard's going to have a reasonable role. I do think that he does remind me a decent amount of Rachaad White. Maybe not quite in his talent level, but I mean, he is a grinder. He's got a big frame. He's got good speed. So overall, I mean, he may be somewhat inefficient. A lot of that has to do with the offensive line. I think he can get some good work early. He's not going to be a season-long play necessarily, but I think he's someone, if you can get him later, you can use him the first couple of weeks while Jonathan Brooks gets ready. And then my other one, because I couldn't just pick one, is Noah Fant. Of course, I realize I've been falling in love with these like ladder third tight ends in this offseason. But if I'm understanding that I may or may not get those top couple of guys, I'm okay stashing a couple of these other guys where I believe that their opportunity in the offense that they're in is going to be fruitful. And I think we forget, I mean, Noah Fant, he's been around for a while, but he's still, I want to say 26, maybe 27. He was immediately involved coming out of college. And I do think in this new look offense, I think he's going to be better utilized and maybe scoring a couple more touchdowns. I think last year he had 0, if I remember correctly. So maybe get back to his old self.
Yeah, I really love that shout. I mean, Chuba Hubbard is in at least an underdog, someone I'm really been targeting those later rounds. What's up, Jamie? Yeah, unfortunately, Jerry had to fulfill actual dad responsibilities and was missing tonight. The tag next to his name, not an injured hamstring, me, it is father. But Jamie, glad to have you with us. The second name, Fant, I mean, someone that we talked about, I think, in our veteran value episode, especially as we got to like that roster bubble tier. Really love the shout. Just some comments this week posted by, I believe, Coach Peak Index on Twitter, talking. I want to say it was the tight ends coach, but they were talking about how they wanted to use Fant. And the funniest bit that I found was they were talking about, oh yeah, we're not going to have him block. There's the other guy in the room, Pharaoh Brown. They referred to. We'll have him to block, but it could be wheels. Excuse me, could be wheels up for Fant. Definitely like that name. I might get even grosser. Someone that I actually just tapped draft on for the first time yesterday in an underdog draft. That is Justice Hill. And man, I this is the least exciting of a sleeper. Usually they have that kind of like sexiness about them, but Justice Hill is just like plain old boring, someone reliable. You kind of know what he does, but we have to think like NFL teams sometimes, especially when we're trying to sort out the murk in depth charts. And Justice Hill is someone that the Ravens have relied on. They, kind of trust him, and they almost want that in a back. If I take you just 3 years ago to the Tyson Williams breakout in the first 2 or 3 games of that season, and then he was completely shelved. And that was a big reason, his fumbling issues, ball security, being able to do what the coach wants. And I think that's what you're going to get from Justice Hill. This is 4th or 5th year in the league. He flashed at times last year, has pass catching upside. And in an offense like the Baltimore Ravens, obviously King Henry is there. There is a lot of value if you can suss out the second choice running back. A lot of people want Keaton Mitchell. A lot of people are talking about Rashawn Ali. But spare a thought for Justice Hill. Boring might be in. Any thoughts on Justice Hill or that Ravens running back situation?
I could not agree more. Justice Hill, especially in Dynasty, he's someone who I was looking to add. Of course, when I did that for a lot of leagues, it would have been maybe before even the rookie draft. But despite adding Henry, I mean, we always knew that they wanted to have a power component to that backfield. They just have one of the best ones in the NFL now, which is great. But I feel like Justice Hill is tremendously valuable to the Ravens. He's maybe not necessarily tremendously valuable just as a running back in the NFL, but he's in a good spot. Like you were saying, there's clearly a level of trust there. And for whatever reason, I don't know what's in the water or in the turf, but Baltimore running backs seem to just get hurt sometimes. And that's one reason why I've been pretty in on Rasheen Ali, but more specifically, he's been drafted by them, but not with, a lot of capital, and he has to earn his spot. Justice Hill has earned his spot, and I think he's going to be a steady change of pace back, even with a healthy Henry. God forbid if they need to spell his touches for some reason, I think he's going to get some good usage.
Yeah, definitely agree. JB, yeah, chiming in, Justice Hill helping win a championship that last season. That's right. In week 17, Justice Hill had like a 19-point game in half PPR, like the first play of the game, ripped off. Yeah, exactly. A huge touchdown, receiving touchdown, the first play of the game. So definitely keep an eye on Justice Hill. That was Choose Your Fighter for this week. Throw in the chat if you got any other sleepers you want us to know about. But without further ado, let's get right into what we're all here for, Scott Fishbowl. Some quick logistical notes. Like I mentioned, 22 rounds with 3 RR. You play 11 starters. That's 1 QB, 1 running back, 1 wide receiver, 1 tight end, 1 super flex spot. And then depending if you are playing on Sleeper or MFL, it's either 5 flex and 1 kicker on Sleeper, or 6 flex where kicker can be used as a flex on MFL. So do remember to check out all the league settings before you jump in that draft, because you might find a few surprises like we have done. So let me just pull up right here the rule scoring, and shoot, I'm just, there we go. I'm usually technologically inept at screen share. My manager can definitely confirm that, but we're just going over a few of the interesting ones that I'll highlight here. Of course, it is still a 6-point passing touchdown. Totally meant to highlight this one. But passing yards have been nerfed to 1 point for 50 yards. Essentially, the passing yards have been halved. Immediately, what was your thought seeing that?
My first thought, if it's going to be player specific, is give me Brock Purdy. I mean, you want the guy who it's not necessarily that they are going to be the Joe Burrows and the CJ Strouds. And I'm not saying that they won't have a lot of passing touchdowns. They will. So that's 6 point. That's still valuable. But from the viewpoint of you want someone who is on a good offense, but, maybe one that's more creative. So when they're getting in the red zone, it's not like they won't be running the ball without the quarterback, with the running back himself. But they might be able to have more creative red zone looks and be able to generate passing touchdowns through there. So they're still getting the benefit of the 6-point touchdown. But when I think Brock Purdy, I think there's a bit of mobility. He can get some work rushing, maybe a rushing touchdown here and there. But he is someone who is going to generate a good amount of touchdowns in that high flying offense. Plenty of weapons. Ricky Pearsall now being added to the mix. Debo, they're going to figure. Debo's there. Brandon Ayuk, they're going to figure it out. Kittle's there. So CMC. I really trust doing something like that where it's a stack of Brock Purdy, possibly George Kittle. We'll get to the tight ends here in a second. So,
yeah, fantastic shout there. Brock Purdy is definitely going later than a lot of the quarterbacks you named, the Burrows, the Strouds, maybe the more traditional pocket passers. But with the passing yards in here, really the touchdown upside is what is going to make or break those kind of quarterback weeks. Going down to the rushing, honestly, no real changes from last year. Do remember the 0.25 per rush attempt, both for running backs, of course, but also for quarterbacks. We'll dive into all the positions in more detail in a little bit. Receptions, an interesting change last year. It was just PPR for all positions but tight end, and then tight end got a bonus. This time, running backs have been brought down to half PPR. Is that changing anything for you? It is an interesting kind of rule. Is that really splitting any ties for you?
So if I'm going back to just when I see it and I think of like who does this benefit, I think of the Derrick Henrys and the Joe Mixon more specifically. It's the guys where I know age-wise is always a concern for running back. I understand this is seasonal. This is not a dynasty look here, but I think with a lot of these running backs, when they get to a certain age, a certain wear and tear, we're waiting for them to slow down. But I feel like with what you saw in Joe Mixon in the last few years in Cincinnati, him going to Houston, him getting a new deal, the offense he's going to be in, I understand it's going to be reasonably pass heavy, but look at that running back room. Like they are going to feed Mixon the ball to help create a pretty balanced offense. And he's shown that he can handle that workload and he can randomly have multi-touchdown games, which that may or may not happen. Don't wait for that. But I do think he's going to have a steady floor. And I think depending on where the ADP settles out, I know that some of that's still being built out now, but I think he's someone who can be a sneaky, either the leader of a running back room or maybe the second or third, but he's going to be a good guy and guys like that, get good work, but maybe are a bit of unsung heroes.
Yeah, totally. I think something I learned last year, we'll see with the data too, but there's going to be a lot of those grinder types that normally we stay away from in fantasy, those types that are producing like 15 attempts for 60 yards, no passing down work at all. You're kind of just hoping they're falling into the end zone for them to really like matter in your lineups. But now with that, especially with the attempt boost, there are going to be a lot of creative ways to fill up those flex spots for sure. We'll get into all that. Tight end, of course, boosted not just with the extra half point for catches, but also an extra point per first down. Tight end's definitely going to make a difference. Kickers, well, we won't talk too much about kickers in this show today, but do remember your kickers. 3.3 point for every made extra point. Definitely target those high value kickers. The kickers on those high scoring offenses, I should say, because you generally, sometimes when I think about kickers in regular redraft, one of the best pieces of advice I got last year was take the Saints kicker because Derek Carr is never going to do anything in the red zone. So you're almost looking for good offenses, but not too good. This completely takes that out of the equation, huh?
Well, that plus, I mean, I know with kickers, depending on how many games they have in domes, and especially for the kickers that play home games in domes where it's not like there's not pressure kicking at home. But at home in a dome, I think there's a bit more control where they could be more comfortable versus those guys that are playing. Say they're playing out in Green Bay or that sort of thing. So,
yeah, great shout. And right on that topic, Jamie, Lions kicker.
Yep.
Lion, I think would fit. Lions as a specific example with how often Dan Campbell goes for it on fourth down and goes for 2 points might be a little bit. I remember Riley Patterson had some stinkers in my lineup last year at least. But good shout there, Jamie. And then, of course, the one that's got kind of everyone in a tizzy is the special teams rules. 10 points for any punt, kickoff, return, touchdown. Something that I think with the new rules, you expect to see a little, slight uptick. At least we know that Rashid Shaheed, who had, I believe, 2 of those last year, finishes with the 28th overall scoring player if you applied this year's rules to last year's scoring. So definitely big boost. Of course, point for 5 yards, kicker, punt return is really going to see some of these guys rise up. If your player recovers the ball in the end zone for a touchdown, I don't know if we'll see too many of those. But anyway, that was the scoring. So let me just switch right on over to a couple of nifty graphs that we have put together. All data here is from the Going for Two website. Let me actually just, if I can, damn. And, I kind of jinxed it there earlier talking about my my technological ineptness. But I really do want to shout out this tool. Thank you so much to Jeff Lambert for putting this together. He is, of course, the big boss over there at Going for Two. But if you haven't looked at this, I really recommend you do ahead of your drafts. This puts very nicely into scoring, comparing Scott Fishbowl 14 this year's scoring, last year's scoring, Scott Fishbowl 13, and then 6-point pass touchdown PPR scoring. More traditional leagues, really good way to look at where the values kind of change. This is available on the Going for Two website. And then just to go over to this table, what I try to put together for all of us here is a little comparison at what the changes in scoring mean. So we have a little table here of variance and points per game versus regular, where negative values mean that a position or was nerfed. So here we have the positions, and here we have kind of QB1 to QB6, QB7 to QB12, so on and so forth. Just immediately, Chu, when you see a table like this, what are your initial thoughts?
Definitely makes me understand, what they did with switching the passing yards specifically. I know that that drops it tremendously. They did do 6-point passing touchdown. But I think overall, when you think of Superflex, you think of I need 2 quarterbacks.
Yeah,
I'm not saying, depending on where you can get them and who they are, I'm not saying that isn't still a viable strategy. But this year, for this league specifically, you look at that chart and you realize, it's one position each, and then the Superflex and so many just flex spots. I think it allows you to get, for lack of a better word, flexible in how you want to build. I don't think there's going to be one way that can only work. Like you were talking about, I have the 104 and you have the 111, and talking about the third down reversal and how that's going to affect people. I think that you can still build with the 2 quarterbacks, but then you look at tight ends, wide receiver, the tremendously interesting thing, looking at the 31 through 36, you're probably looking at the guys who have that returner ability. So
right.
It's the wide receiver 3s on the team. It's the Greg Dortch and the Rashid. Well, Rashid Shaheed's probably the wide receiver too. But it's those guys where it's like they're getting snaps in the offense, maybe not to the degree of the starter, but they're also either the punt returner or the punt and kick returner. And as you mentioned with Shaheed and plenty of other guys in this format, that is tremendously valuable. And I think for enough people in the Scott Fishbowl that aren't really aware of that, and before the ADP kind of spits out real time, you can take advantage and grab some of these guys where people are going to be like, why on earth did you just get Rashid Shaheed before so-and-so? And it's like, yeah, because he's going to double the score of this other guy that you picked that you think is good in this format. So
yeah, exactly. I think Shaheed, like you said, 28th overall player, a little higher up, but I know just from looking at the data, Marvin Mims and Xavier Gibson were both in this 25 to 36 range, and players that we wouldn't have even made a redraft bench, and they're contributing starters in this kind of format. Let me just actually zoom out a little, because I really like the point you made about Superflex. So looking at this table here, which is kind of breaking down the actual scoring, really, as Chu was kind of saying, once you get down to QB 19 through 30, you're not really seeing that kind of advantage that you traditionally expect from a Superflex, by having that QB in a Superflex spot. So I think we'll jump right into the QBs as a position, but I think the first piece of advice, just to reiterate what Chu said, is don't go reaching for that second quarterback if you've got it into that dirty range, because that's how you kind of play Superflex in the past. There are so many different ways to make your team this year. So let's just go over to what I got here. For us, is I took the top 120 players as far as Scott Fishbowl 14 points per game went, and now we just have it filtered to QB. So let me just get a nice little. It's gonna work. It's probably not gonna. Oh, we have rank. Unhelpfully, rank is all the way over here, so don't mind us if we mess up some ranks. But just looking at this list of top 12 QBs through Kyler Murray at 12. What are your initial thoughts just from some of the names we have here? Justin Fields all the way up at 4.
Yeah, I mean, some of those, the Justin Fields, the Joe Flacco, Kirk Cousins to some degree. I know he was on an absolute tear, and I think he's going into a good situation, but I think not as good as many people may think, even assuming he's healthy. But the first name that jumps out to me, which I'm big on this guy in any format, unless production means you don't get points, is Anthony Richardson. I think with this format, people are certainly going to, as you saw, it drops off pretty precipitously once we get towards even like the middling quarterbacks, let alone the latter third quarterbacks. And I think you really need to have an emphasis on, you do obviously at least need one quarterback. You don't have to commit, obviously, to the starting 2 quarterbacks situation, but getting these first couple of guys that really do have the rushing upside, it's already been important in fantasy, but it's tremendously important now. But the reason I had mentioned Brock Purdy, who I know is but one after Kyler Murray, there is for the guys that you can wait on a little bit and still get a reasonable expectation for passing touchdowns and have a little bit of mobility and that sort of thing. You're not missing out on too much, especially when you see the tremendous value in the running backs, as we saw, tight ends most specifically. And, I see it more in best ball, but if you can do some of these stacks, you think about a 6 point for passing touchdown for a quarterback that's throwing a decent amount of them. And you also have the tight end he's throwing it to, or the wide receiver one he's throwing it to. So there's going to be a lot of value in that sort of stuff that I think some people are maybe familiar with in some settings, but I think it's really emphasized here with the tight ends and top heavy with the quarterbacks.
No, absolutely. I mean, you could see some monstrous games with all the scoring boosts. I remember, I think I had Evan Ingram in for a couple of what ended up being 60-point games based on the scoring. But a good point as well on stacking. You got to remember that this, the tournament, I can't exactly remember how many people go into the final week, but you're playing against more than just one team. Once you get to playoffs, you're playing against hundreds of teams each round, and have to verify that final number for you. But stealing is the most important. So where you can get that advantage, bring in a bit of that underdog kind of strategy, that will be important here. I loved your point on Anthony Richardson. I think maybe for you, and definitely early on, he's going to go off the board in the first 6 picks for sure. Yep. Someone that I at 111, and albeit the 2 mocks I've done so far, I've been targeting Jaden Daniels, right? And that's the exact same kind of test case. Someone who will have a lot of those attempts. Maybe in a Cliff Kingsbury offense, you'll get a lot of those passing opportunities too. But it won't even matter with someone like Jaden Daniels when he can, run 8 to 10 times a game. Josh Allen was averaging around 8 rush attempts a game, especially when Joe Brady came in. But Daniels is someone that I'm taking a lot. I'm looking at least at the 111, And if I just switch over to ADP, of course, again, ongoing for two. Definitely go check out all the stuff, all the tools here before your drafts. And am I going to be able to find this? Daniel's ranked at 33 from ADP. I wonder if he doesn't have my draft in because I've definitely taken him at 11. So this minimum should be.
He would have been off the board if you didn't draft him.
Yeah. Right. But I mean, for me, Jaden Daniels is a first round pick in this kind of format. You gotta remember the scoring when you're taking these players. I think for me, I don't want to say any strategy is the worst, but one I would advise people against, especially if you are missing out on the Allens, Hurts, Lamar, Anthony Richardson. Don't feel forced to then go in on a Joe Burrow or a Stroud or a Jordan Love at the late first, early second kind of price point, because they are not going to return the kind of high end QB value that you expected them. Just going back to our ADP ranks, and let me just bold these numbers here so it might be a little easier. But I mean, Purdy actually 13. He probably finished around 13, maybe because of the passing touchdown outside that, like you mentioned. But Mahomes all the way at 11. Justin Herbert at 14, Trevor Lawrence 16, Stroud, the darling, all the way down at 17. A couple of these names that served us well in redraft, in normal scoring formats, are really not doing the same. If we go down to a few of the later names, I know you mentioned Purdy, but if you're thinking even later for QBs, who are some names that you have in mind?
Daniels is a tremendously interesting one. I think if he's the first quarterback that you get, think of what value you're able to get before. And like you mentioned, if you're at the 111 spot, it's the 111, a couple picks later, you get another one, and then it's third round reversal. So if with each of those first three picks, none of them are a quarterback, you're not having to reach, and you're still able to get someone who I think has, I would say, good upside. I mean, I think when you look at the chart that you had before, the drop off, the disparity, it's not that big. It's not that different. But also what he brings is the rushing upside. So it could be more boom bust games. But I mean, if you're getting the boom games at the right time, but you also have the higher floor of, the one of the top 5 tight ends, maybe even 2, depending on how you draft, a top running back that's getting, good volume, a couple of catches. So overall, I think it's, just talking it out now, it's funny to think of how late am I going to wait for a quarterback? It seems like such a bizarre thing to say, but I think so many people, especially the ones in the later rounds, can take advantage of that and can be set up pretty well going forward.
Yeah, definitely. And just to kind of hone in on the point of how late can I wait, this is a table that shows how many of each position in early ADP. I think my ADP was last updated as of the 20th. But 25 quarterbacks taken through the first 10 rounds, including 6 in the first. You're seeing all your QB1s go in the first 3 rounds. Really could be some like sneaky falling value. I think one that comes to mind for me is actually Daniel Jones. And I've been on this show advocating for everyone to go pick up Drew Lock, because I think Jones could lose his gig at the end of the year because of that injury guarantee. But Daniel Jones, again, in this format, is someone with that rushing upside, someone who will get that consistent number of carries. They've just added Malik Neighbors into the room. They've got no Darren Waller, but 2 super athlete tight ends, especially Theo Johnson, but also Daniel Bellinger, to do some work in passing touchdown-wise. But really with the attempts and how late you're probably having to get him, Daniel Jones is someone to look at. Bo Nix as well may sound real gross, but so in college, Nix actually had quite a few number of attempts, and that's something that can really add up. And when you're just looking for, if you're shopping in, these kind of ranges for QBs, we didn't even have, it makes sense. The last 2 quarterbacks didn't pop up in the top 120, but you're playing the value game, but you also need to play the scoring game. You can kind of maybe make up what Jared Goff gets you at QB 18 with Bo Nix later on.
I mean, the Broncos are going to be dog shit, but I'm really excited to see Bo Nix, to be honest.
Yeah,
I think when you look at all the rookie quarterbacks, like he's not the one I'm most excited in terms of I think he's going to do the best. I think that's unrealistic, but especially like you're saying in this format, when you get late enough, it's do I have a quarterback who is starting? Because it allows you to stock up on so many other positions that are tremendously more valuable. And like even like what you're seeing with some of these charts, it's not so much of a drop off. So you have so many flex spots. You can actually just stack up the running back, wide receiver and tight end positions and kickers. I will never forget kickers. I've loved playing with the kickers in Scott Fishbowl thus far. They've been crazy valuable and obviously are still not quite as valuable as last year, I don't think, but are still pretty valuable.
Yeah, definitely. And this is the last point I want to make about the quarterbacks. As we see these drop-offs, so a reminder that the numbers in these charts are basically saying that quarterbacks 7 through 12 had on average a 1.4 point drop-off in their points per game. And you're seeing 1.4, 1.4, 1.5. Only a 0.5 drop-off in the top 6 quarterbacks. And then if you go back to the top 6, that's Allen rushing upside, Hurts rushing upside, Lamar rushing upside, Flacco. And then Justin Fields, who he actually ranked in points per game in PPR 6-point passing touchdown, was the QB 15 in points per game. And he was all the way up at QB 5 in the Scott Fishbowl scoring. So really do remember the profile. We always think about rushing quarterbacks, but this is where maybe you can get a little bit creative. Sorry, I just go crazy when I have these sheets in front of me. Like Josh Dobbs is a fantastic example because that's also what he did. He just would scramble at any side of the play, breaking down. Ended up as QB 15 points in PPG. So definitely interesting ways to build your quarterback room. Maybe the last piece of advice would just be to not panic. If you don't feel like the room is crowding you out at quarterback, if you're not able to get the second one, right? Or even you're taking your first one in the 4th round. So with that, let's just go over to the next position. And why don't we do running back next? Let's get the top running backs up here. Just a quick reminder at how the RBs did when you compare it to regular scoring. And you'll see that aside from tight end, which very understandable with all the rules, but running backs at all levels got quite a significant boost in points per game. Immediately, Chu, what are your initial thoughts about it? We talked about it a little bit, but how are you approaching the running back position?
So we'll get to the tight end position, but I think that's going to be tremendously important. But what I see here, when I see such, stability throughout, each of the ranges we have here, I'm looking at Joe Mixon. I'm looking at Ramondre Stevenson. I'm looking at Najee Harris. Like I'm looking at these maybe unsexier guys where I do believe they're going to get some level of work in either as, in a pretty even committee, whether they're like the slight A or the slight B. But guys where I feel like I can wait a couple of rounds, get them. I know you get a little dangerous when you're like, oh, I can wait on quarterback. I can wait on. It's like, well, no, you can't wait on everything. I mean, you do have to kind of pick a direction. But I think what you're seeing with the running back here is you can wait on quarterback and not have too much of a drop off. Talking about some of the guys that we've talked about in the latter third. And with running back, depending on, I mean, of course, if you're getting a Christian McCaffrey, if you're getting a, Bijan, Jahmyr Gibbs, Breece Hall, any of those guys up there, I get that. But I think what you're seeing is if you're ever in doubt, like, looking at your roster, it's not the worst thing, depending on what the rest of your team looks like, to just snag a running back you feel like will have a stable workload, because I feel like those are the high floor guys that you're going to want. And, when we get to tight ends, it's a lot of green, but think about how many tight ends are relevant. Think about how many teams use, the multi-tight end type system, and you can't really bank on a week-to-week basis. But with running back, I think it's some of the guys that have, a Zach Moss, like these guys that they're not the sexiest picks, but you trust that the workload will be reasonably stable. And if they happen to have a good, efficient game with a touchdown or two, then you're good. So just don't get too cute with it, but just appreciate the uggos that no one wants as running backs.
I mean, perfectly said, because immediately one thing that my eye was drawn to is how running backs 19 through 36, your low end RB2s and your RB3s actually do. They, I mean, all through it, but especially here, general scoring, you kind of expect your wide receivers to make up those last flex spots in deeper lineups. But here's where, like Chu put, you can really stack up the bottom of your team with those later running backs. Brian Robinson is like a name that I would add. He's like generally going around RB30, but even if that's a split backfield, Brian Robinson's going to get the major share of the carries. Just going over to our top. Oh, let's go to the top 20 that we fit. I mean, some names that are like David Montgomery sitting as high as RB9. He did have a great season with a lot of touchdowns, but even though towards the end of the year we saw Gibbs take more of that role and Montgomery was maybe more of a 10-point player in half PPR, not great, but in this format, those carries are going to add up.
Pacheco,
perfect.
They trust him.
Pacheco is going to feast this year. Pacheco might be my early flag hand. Derrick Henry's going to get so much work. Joe Mixon, like you said. Josh Jacobs. That's an interesting one. I actually was able to start AJ Dillon way too many times last year, especially when Aaron Jones was out. But even when he wasn't, AJ Dillon would give you the stinkiest 16 for 48 at 3 yards per carry and still be like a 12-point player in those kinds of weeks. Gus Edwards and RB30. Interesting to note also, in the top 120 players by points per game, more than a quarter are made up by running backs, right? The position is very deep because of the scoring.
Yeah, that's the thing. If you're ever feeling uncertain, it's not the worst thing to take a running back because, again, with how the rosters are set up, you have all of those flex spots. And realistically, we already normally are going to like to have a couple of extra running backs on really any fantasy roster just because of the attrition there. So this is helpful just because with so many flex spots, you're probably going to start a lot of those guys. If you ever have any doubts, you're like, well, this guy's going to get, at least 5 carries, maybe get a couple of targets. And if he vultures a touchdown, like you're not going to get that production out of a back end tight end. You might not even get that production out of a later quarterback.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Tying back into that point, Superflex is truly a Superflex spot. It's not your QB2 spot in these kinds of leagues. Bears top 25 running back, super late in the 18th round. That's certainly a better value than a first-round pick last year. Of course, JV did pick Roschon in the first round. It has to be said, Scott Fishbowl, at the end of the day, is for charity. It's for a great cause. Please do donate to Fantasy Cares, get up by Scott Fishbowl if you haven't already. I believe Jeff is running a donation match right now, so go donate through Going for Two and get your match doubled. All going to a good cause, but we're here to still get our name at the top of the leaderboard as well. But yeah, and this will feed into the point about wide receivers. But when you kind of look at those breakdowns and how much quicker wide receiver scoring drops off from very similar to the top elite QBs, gets a little lower in your back half first, then really drops off for your wide receiver 2s compared to your wide receiver 1s. This is where you almost might want to go like a hero wide receiver. Get your, can you get like Chase, Jefferson, Amon-Ra, in the first or the second, and then you fill up that one wide receiver spot, and then you're just knocking running back after. But yeah, take me through wide receivers. How are you approaching this position in Scott Fishbowl?
That's exactly it. Just looking at that drop off, I think that in the last couple of years, just in general redraft fantasy, I think the discussion has been back and forth. Are we going more running back? Are we going more wide receiver? I think depending on with how it starts, it is still super flex. So there's going to be enough people that maybe try to get the quarterback early. I understand that. And depending on where you are in the first round, if your wide receiver is going to be, like you said, a Chase or I do think, Amon-Ra could be CeeDee Lamb, like knowing you have that anchoring with only needing to start, I believe it's the one wide receiver, correct?
Right.
So you have that. And then as we were talking about that kind of sneaky value at the back end of the wide receivers, you have the Rashid Shaheeds, the Marvin Mims, the Greg Dortches. You have these other guys where, I mean, they're wide receivers and some may be the second or third on their team, but the point is that it's the returning returning points that are going to help lift you that up. So, for a fact, if you draft a CeeDee Lamb somewhere in the first round, you can also still get some of those other guys that happen to be returners, or maybe you're kind of gadget guys and get some carries because you get the. Ooh, actually, that's a fair question. Would a wide receiver get the?
I think so.
I think so, right?
It just says rushing. So any
Okay.
rush attempt.
Right.
Oh, Debo might eat in this.
I was going to say. I was thinking. Yeah, I think Laviska Shenault found a new team, so maybe they give him a couple.
Curtis Samuel, a favor on the show. Curtis Samuel has been used a lot in that kind of gadgety role.
Ooh,
yeah.
Cordarrelle Patterson, 100%.
I totally saw.
People are going to be furious with Arthur Smith in Pittsburgh doing that stuff.
I totally saw Steven. I was in a mock draft with Steven Hoops at Target Share on Twitter. Shout out Steven. He does some fantastic work. Go check him out. But he drafted like Rashid Shaheed, Marvin Mims, and then Cordarrelle Patterson in like round 6 through 8 in one of the drafts I was in. But yeah, I mean, let's just go over to the top wide receivers, and I do want to highlight some of those names that popped up. Rashid Shaheed was the wide receiver 7 last year in points per game, man. I mean, look at that.
I love Rashid Shaheed, by the way. In his rookie season, I was like, this guy can be a thing. And then when this scoring format happened, I was like, everyone's going to know Rashid Shaheed's name. This is the best thing in the world.
Yep. Greg Dortch, too. I've been a huge Greg Dortch guy, but I actually didn't realize he was doing some punt returns for the Cardinals. He's slowly shooting up the scoring. One point I do want to make about with the return yard format, of course, there are rule changes. We don't know how much production is going to come. Is that production going to go up? I think a fair bet would be yes, the production is going to go up. But if you just look down these names, yes, Rashid Shaheed, of course, stands out with the 10.3 per game boost to his scoring. But then when you just go down the list, it's your usual suspects, maybe in a bit of a different order than you've seen in other lists, but you actually don't get to Marvin Mims, Xavier Gipson until 32, 33. So remember to keep in mind that while the scoring format is fun, you're going to see a lot of boosts. Don't go reaching for these guys a little too early, Hutch.
Xavier Gipson, second round. You know what? I'm learning my love for obscure and overall probably not that great players is really going to reach ahead, I feel like, in Scott Fishbowl this year, because I will stop myself from drafting some of these guys way too soon. But I feel like for people being aware of the scoring format, there's going to be a couple people really kind of grabbing onto the Shaheeds and that kind of stuff. But there's going to be some of these guys that I feel like do actually slip to like acceptable value to draft them at. And that will allow you to, before that, when you're getting the top tier tight end, when you're getting an anchor wide receiver, as you were talking about, you can have some of these other guys that fall to levels where it's like, oh, wow, one of my flex spots is like the third best returner in the NFL. And he might get a target or two in the game. So it's like, there's a lot of value to be had with the wide receiver, I feel like.
No, definitely. And wide receiver, I feel like maybe we say this every year, and as the NFL leans more into the passing game, but wide receiver feels exceptionally deep this year. Even, the wide receiver economy on underdog drafts is a little bit crazy right now, but when you see like a Deontay Johnson at wide receiver 44, I feel like both of us would probably land on that's a little too low. But when a name like that is going at wide receiver 44, that's when you know this position is really deep. So just to bring that back to our original point, don't go feeling that you need to – all of these players we love, Collins, Ayuk, especially in full PPR. Even a Mike Evans did so well. Amari Cooper – when they're actually only scoring 16.8 points per game, Amari Cooper, and you go back to your low end RB2 can get you 17. that's when you might have to put that name brand a little bit in your back pocket and kind of draft for the league you're playing in. Any other points on wide receivers before we move on?
I don't think so. I think it'll just be interesting. I know we've talked about it a little bit with returners and the value there, but I do think it'll be important to. We won't get enough information probably here in the next week or so before drafts happen, but just for some of those later dart throws, maybe consider some rookies where it's like, I mean, I'm a huge Malik Washington fan. Think about, hey, is he maybe going to get some return work? Maybe ahead of Braxton Berrios, he may or may not. I'm not sure, but think about some of those guys where it's like these are sincere dart throws, but I think they're going to be put in positions that helps earn them a roster spot because they're contributing on special teams or something like that. But that is now tremendously valuable in Scott Fishbowl, and guys who are deep in any format will now actually provide value to you on your team that you could start at some point.
No, absolutely. I think rookies who can perform that role might be that kind of, if you can guess right, that could be an edge because we have no evidence of them doing it for their NFL teams. Like I mentioned Xavier Worthy last week when last episode when we talked about potential returners, and that's someone that maybe no one has on a list saying the Chiefs returner is XYZ because we haven't seen Xavier Worthy do it yet, but he did that in college. Andy Reid likes to bring these rookie receivers in a little bit slower. So a lot of creative ways to fill out those spots. But just to look at an ADP view in the top 10 rounds, we actually have 46 wide receivers drafted in the top 10 rounds, which to me, and you'll have to let me know if you agree with this, to me, just looking at the data then presented like this, I think that's way too many.
It's a mistake. I feel like it's understandably people are just kind of conditioned to be like, this is the range I take wide receivers.
Yeah.
I think once you get past a certain number, like you were specifically talking about, like the top 12, I mean, you can stretch it there like early in the teens, but there's a certain point, certainly when you're hitting to the 13 to 18, then 19 to 24, that's really starting to hit a pretty precipitous drop in each of those ranges. So I think what you're getting outside of the late teens there, I think it's not like these people are draftable. I think it's just worth considering what do the other positions look like right now.
Exactly. You have to consider the opportunity cost of taking, Brandon Ayuk is one of my favorite players in the league. The opportunity cost of drafting Brandon Ayuk, who I hope this gets us some ad revenue. Ayuk is going as the 44th player overall. So in round 4, that just does not click with what I think the data is telling you. If you can get, and let me just flip then back to running backs, I'd rather have Joe Mixon than Brandon Ayuk in this format. I guarantee Joe Mixon is going a lot later than Ayuk. So definitely think of the position that you would be giving up, as Chu said, if you are to draft, the wide receiver 13 to 24 in rounds like 4 through 7, 4 through 6.
I'm taking comfort in the fact that this is going to be the ugliest team I've ever drafted, but they're going to be damn good.
Oh, exactly. I remember last year at Scott Fishbowl, I was the type of guy who would go and take Darrell Henderson off the waivers in every single league I was in. And I think I was in a kind of a starting lineup crunch and threw him in on his first week back in the Rams over a 20-point game, just with 14 carries and a touchdown and a few catches here and there. So there will be some names that we might not see in any other league. But with that, let's just get to our last position. And this is, kind of the one that is always talked about in regards to Scott Fishbowl, the extra juice scoring. Tight ends, you can see tight ends obviously boosted, on a positional basis, boosted the most, 6.6 plus to their PPR, points per game in this kind of scoring format. How are you approaching tight ends this year?
So I think, the chart says it all, certainly. A lot of the top end guys, like if I'm looking for like trying to do a stack, if it ends up being that way with a quarterback and a skill position player, it's likely going to be trying to do it with a quarterback and a tight end. And I understand that probably is going to mean that it's going to be needing to pick, the Evan Ingram, the George Kittle, that kind of stuff as early as possible. I understand the Travis Kelce, Patrick Mahomes. I'm curious to see where Mahomes goes, if I'm being honest. I think in this sort of setting, everything, I I honestly have no idea. I do think Kansas City too is going to be a not a completely different offense, but maybe a little bit revamped and maybe lean even more heavy on the run through Pacheco. Um, but yeah, back to tight ends. I mean, it makes me very comfortable in knowing the obscure tight ends that may or may not mean anything to anyone else are going to be on my roster. I mean, like we were talking about running back, that's the safe thing where it's like, I trust that this guy's a role, I'll pick him. At a certain point when he gets to tight end, I mean, that's something that if you don't get one of those first couple of guys, the value stays pretty steady as you were looking at with those ranges. But value may still be found elsewhere. I think it's going to be interesting to see where is the dead zone for each position. And I mean, looking at the tight end, I don't know where that is, if I'm being honest with you. And since there is, again, the flexibility we were talking about with the multiple flex spots. So if you think about the upside for tight ends, and if we think about in-game action, thinking about how many are actually involved consistently enough, trying to live and die by just the single touchdown, that may or may not be valuable. But if you have somebody that, say they get 2 or 3 catches for, like 20 yards or something, as a deeper flex spot, that's not terrible. I mean, that would be a losing start in a traditional fantasy setting, but in this, I mean, that could be something that provides you a good floor where you otherwise wouldn't be able to find it.
Yeah, exactly. Think of the chain movers, especially like first downs. A lot of them do go to tight ends. Sometimes, you were all hoping for the Laporta points, and Brock Wright pops out of nowhere. Shane Zylstra pops out of nowhere to get that catch. That is very interesting. I did only bring in the top 120 in scoring, so this cut itself off at tight end 14. Actually, very interesting that this lined up. I hope I didn't do something wrong here. This lined up perfectly with the. Maybe that makes sense, but when you're kind of seeing once you get top 4 had 20 points per game, 19 for Andrews, Kittle 18. Maybe makes sense. Fewer receptions, more efficiency. Trey McBride, this was a partial season. I'm sure if you only look at the back half, he's up there. Then it drops off with Cole Kmet. So maybe there again. If you've not picked your first tight end and you've seen 12 go off the board, you think that's where you take a step further, wait, and then maybe go in on your Fants and your Henrys and of course Colby Parkinson. You think that's kind of where the bar is?
Probably so. I mean, I think I could probably talk myself into trickling out a couple of more, maybe to 15. But I wouldn't want to feel like I'm reaching. If I feel like I'm reaching for the tight end 14 or something like that versus another running back who I think has a firm hold in a committee still, but has a firm role in that, I'd probably lean towards the running back than I would the middling tight end. But this will be another interesting one to see where I feel like there's the concentration at the top for tight ends, but there's always a couple. Again, I was big on Ferguson last season, and we saw what he did this season. Not quite with the same conviction, but Parkinson. There's plenty of these guys where you see that the road has been paved in front of them. The carpet's been rolled out in the sense of who else is going to, play this role. And I think depending on what the offense is, who the quarterback is, what the general scheme is for what the tight end needs to do, generating, 4, maybe 5 targets a game and hoping for a touchdown. Again, that could be valuable, but just understand where you're drafting them in relation to the running backs and that sort of thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I definitely took him as a tight end in one of my mock drafts, but he didn't pop up here. So I wonder if he was listed under QB. And that is, of course, Taysom Hill, who, they seem to just keep saying he's going to get more and more involved. He's taking snaps at halfback. Like, if you can add, like, carries to all the tight end boosts as well, Taysom Hill is going to be a guy that you really want to start. You're excited to start Taysom Hill. I think that's a good. On that note, let's actually just go over to the ADP. Of course, again, this is available on Going for Two site. Let me take Dallas Goedert, for example, maybe around tight end 12. He's 86th overall. So, we've got a lot we could cover here with ADP, but let's just start on this point. Dallas Goedert going 86th alongside David Montgomery. You see Ramondre, Najee in this format is going to be a killer. Zamir White's going to be a killer. Then Dalton Schultz. Just from some of those names, would you take Goddard here over one of those running backs?
I honestly wouldn't. I think when I think of the guys that I would really like in this format, some of the ones that do stick out that I think of Najee and David Montgomery,
right.
I think, and Ramondre, obviously. I think Ramondre specifically, I feel like he's towards the latter end of guys where I feel like they have a stranglehold on the touches that they're going to get. And I mean, obviously the deal he just got paying him was a top 5, top 7 running back. I do think it's probably more so. It seems like he's a good fit for their system. I think what they're going to be doing for their running scheme is going to be maybe more in tune with what he thrived at in college. And of course, he had a good rookie season, but a bit down last year. And those are the kind of guys where it's like it will feel gross drafting them, and even seeing the scoring again. I don't think Dallas Goedert's going to do bad by any means, but I can see more reason and more logic to pick Ramondre if it's between those two.
Yeah.
What about you?
I'm in lockstep with you there. We might have to go a little bit further down. Actually, I do just want to look at this comment from Jamie, because if you could stack Lamar and Andrews in this format, that would be unbelievable. Lamar is going around the 4th overall pick.
Oh, is
Mahomes, Mahomes, you had asked going at 5th overall. I think this is a little too high in this format. Of course, Mahomes, you expect touchdown regression and a sneaky scrambler, really, but maybe that's a little high.
Those first downs, maybe?
First downs, yeah.
Yeah.
I think they may have. I want to say last year they were first down passing first downs also got boost. So I think that one may have been taken out.
And it's just receiving and rushing.
Receiving and rushing first downs, yeah. And the boost for tight ends. One stack, according to the ADP, this should be possible. I would take this all day from the 111. Get me some Kyler Murray, and then I take Trey McBride on the way back around the board there. Just on the tight ends, like Freiermuth was going at
he's about 100. Love it.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of the tight ends the names we just talked about. We're doing this all together, folks.
That's right.
We go right to the top. I'd want to take Zach Moss there. I want to slam Raheem Mostert.
That's what I'm saying. I don't know why people don't like Raheem Mostert, especially in seasonal leagues. This is the only format you're supposed to like him. You don't have to like him in Dynasty because he's 31 years old, but they just gave him a new contract, albeit it's only a year or two. But like, he knows the system. I don't care if they just got Jalen Wright. I don't care if Devon Achan's still there. Like Jeff Wilson, I was going to get a touch here or there, but like, dude, Raheem Mostert, like at this point, this is crazy.
Seriously. So then, I guess Musgrave would be around tight end 14.
That'll be the sneaky one to see who's going to be the starting tight end in Green Bay, or how they're going to split that up.
But even then, when they were playing by themselves, I feel like Tucker Kraft or Musgrave, they were good for 5 to 6 targets for 40, 50 yards in this offense. They get some first downs. Jam that into your lineup right there. But then you're still seeing Jalen Warren. I'm drafting, honestly, way too much Devin Singletary, considering that he's on the Giants. But I like these.
Hey, watch out for Tracy though. He might he won't steal his job, but I think he'll get a little bit of work in there.
Yeah, Brian Robinson, Zeke.
Wow.
Again, all these guys I'd rather have in my
Jerome Ford, Nick Chubb's not. I know he had a good workout video, but I don't think he's going to be 110% on week 1. So
Cade Otton.
Cade Otton feels like a Noah Fant to me.
Yeah.
In terms of just like, it'll be all right, but it's like at this late, why not?
Yeah, exactly. Then you're getting to your Hunter Henrys, and now you're in a range where it's these back end wide receivers. I mean, first of all, why is just honestly in a tournament like this, maybe Justin Fields is the boost.
Somebody
Honestly,
watched the Madden preview. They're like, oh my god, he's gonna be returning kicks.
Yeah. He might honestly maybe the sneaky play of the year. But then now Hunter Henry, okay, you're going alongside, we talked about Curtis Samuel, but you're going alongside like wide receiver fours and handcuff running backs. Maybe this would then be like that sweet spot. Okay, I haven't even heard of this DeAndre Tompkins before.
Was that for Buffalo or Green Bay?
Green Bay must be a kick returner. Although I thought that was Keyshawn Nixon was at least a very might have had that wrong. But Marvin Mims. Okay, this is where
this late. That's crazy.
Yeah, maybe that draft didn't make it into the ADP because, like I said, Steven took it in the 6th or 7th round. So, but this is where Marvin Mims, when you're considering like where he's going, I mean,
after Chigakonkwo, like I know tight ends are juice, but it's Chigakonkwo. Come on, and that was not a compliment, Chick.
Right. I mean, I'm honestly learning a lot just going through this here with you. But do take a look at the early ADP. Of course, if you can jam them in. If you're in a slow draft, you do have an extra week to prepare. Do jump into the mock drafts being hosted by Going for Two. A lot of great people in those drafts. I think we covered a lot there. I guess just going back to the scoring. Any last words of advice, words of wisdom for the viewers about Scott Fishbowl?
I mean, the main thing is just study what this chart says right now. It's a nice reminder if you're in the middle of your draft and you need kind of just something like, this feels like where I would take a receiver. You might be good to remind yourself that, hey, maybe this is where people are making the mistake and I can get the edge in the 4th round, in the 5th. Like, just take a second and think, this isn't normal. There may be an advantage somewhere else. And you likely are able to take advantage of someone letting Mims fall, someone letting a Hunter Henry fall, something like waiting on a quarterback and getting Bo Nix instead. You don't know where it's going to come because I hate picking one strategy because it kind of unfurls as you draft. But I think there's a number of different strategies that you can attack depending on your draft position and depending on how everybody else drafts around you. So just be cognizant of it's weird, but it'll be okay. Exactly. First time I've ever said that phrase out loud, which makes me feel very uncomfortable.
Embrace the weirdness. And I think that's, what is so great about this tournament, this scoring. There's so many ways you can approach it, but by being prepared, by really understanding the scoring, where the edges are, where maybe the edges are in ADP, really everything that Chu said there, you can get some sneaky value. I think in this league, the first waiver run is going to be insane as we see like, okay, this guy is actually the punt returner. He's actually going for 50 receiving or punt return yards every game, and he wasn't even drafted, right? So I think we'll see a lot of that. But over an hour, so thank you all for being with us for that. I hope that was extremely helpful. At least it was for me, Chu. Tell the people where they can find you. Tell the people where they can find you and how excited you are for this tournament coming up.
Yeah, you should find me on Twitter or X at Father Dynasty. Come at me, anything. Scott Fishbowl, Dynasty, regular fantasy football, fatherhood stuff. And you see, got my little fatherhood paraphernalia behind me there. But yeah, and very excited for Scott Fishbowl. Mentioning fatherhood stuff. Last year was the first year I did this, and I'll do it again this year. I let my son make one starting roster decision every single week. So it's that kind of stuff where it's for charity. It's fun. It doesn't mean I don't want to destroy everyone else that's in my division. That's just, I wake up and think that every day. But it's fun. And I mean, what Fantasy Cares does and the amount of money they raise, like you said, Rahul, Jeff's done a tremendous job at raising a lot of money here in the last couple of weeks. So if you can, please go donate. Obviously, sign up for Scott Fishbowl for next year if you didn't get in. And it's a great thing to come together in the fantasy space.
Yeah, I completely agree with Chu there. It is just a great event. Very grateful to to be in it. I mean, maybe just like last point, I don't want to say even like starstruck, but like sometimes like I'll go and watch like the show that Fields Yates does on ESPN. He starts a show talk about his Scott Fishbowl team. I just listened to a Fantasy Footballers podcast, and they're talking about the Scott Fishbowl. It's just such a great event to be a part of. Really highlights the best of the fantasy football community. But that was our show. My name still is Rahul. You can find me on yes, maybe not 5 seconds ago, but now it is Rahul. You can find me on Twitter or X at SmallTalkFF, and I know pumping a lot of content out there, but I'm having a great time and hope you've enjoyed seeing that. Always open to talk shop here. But this has been the Fantasy Assessment. Thank you for joining us for the Scott Fishbowl special. Good luck on your drafts coming up.